Welcome to the AI Files podcast, your ultimate destination for staying updated on all things artificial intelligence. You can find us in Apple Podcasts as well as YouTube. I'm Shadab Hussain, your co host of the show. I'm a director of data and AI at Microsoft with over 23 years of experience in the analytics and AI field.
And I'm Jamie Basilico, co-host of the AI Files. As a data and AI technical specialist, I have over 35 years of expertise in data-related and AI domains, having worked with many of the Fortune 500 companies over that period of time. Please note, this is not an official Microsoft channel. The views and opinions expressed by the co-host are their own and do not represent the views of Microsoft. With that being said, there's a lot that we have to go through in this episode, Shadab. A lot of news. It seems like you can never rest on AI. I know that's for sure.
We can count on it, in fact. So, to let us rest. Yes, a lot of things are happening, and this week, Jamie, you and I we discussed. Let's have two new segments, which is like AI code of the week, because there are lots of people talking about it. It's a happening thing. So obviously, some very profound thoughts come out from industry leaders, researchers, or even the celebrities. So we'll talk about that, and that will actually help us bring some perspectives around those codes. And the second is that there's tons of activity in the startups, AI startups. So we will pick one AI startup which may be very relevant to the one of the other topic that we're talking about, and then we'll just describe what that startup is doing, because there are some really fascinating stuff the companies are doing. They leveraging AI to actually solve the problems. So
Yeah, and definitely on that note of startups, just a quick little aside. I was out at Nashville all week. By the way, today is Sunday, August 18th, and just got back yesterday. And I was there for a conference, a legal tech conference called ILTACon, actually presented at the conference around artificial intelligence, specifically, fine tuning, or I'll call it quote unquote customizing large language models for use within the legal industry. Anyway, didn't want to talk about what I was there for, but to your point about startups, in any of these conferences, they actually have, exhibitor halls. You had your typical, I'll call it predominant um, companies there, from like Relativity or iManage. If you're in the legal space, you know who those are. But there are a lot of startups there, and it seemed like everybody had AI on their banner in the exhibit hall. So it's like, if you weren't talking about AI, you didn't have anybody that was interested in talking to you. Like I said, a lot of new startups that I got a chance to talk to, and it's certainly energizing when you go out to these type of industry conferences and you just see how artificial intelligence is being applied in terms of real use cases to solve issues or challenges that an industry or companies have. So to your point about AI startups, I think this is a great addition. There seems to be new new companies popping up pretty much all the time.
yeah, it's really fascinating. All right, so let's start with the code, AI code of the week. And AI code of the week for this week, I would say, the Goldman Sachs CEO's David Solomon, he actually talked about, he says, AI is not a bubble. It is a trend that we are in the early stages of seeing how it affects business productivity. And I think this code is very relevant as well, because there has been um, a lot of discussions around, is AI real? Is AI really giving the benefit? And, you know, I would say that there are always some naysayers which say these things about anything, even internet or telecom or mobile. Um, but the thing is that he talks about how, even though it is an early stage, but it does provide a lot of business productivity enhancements. And then he's talking about some example he gave, which was related to Louisa AI, how that was actually started within the Goldman Sachs, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And then it was such a good idea that they actually spun it off as a new startup. And now the Louisa AI, which is now the topic of our today's episode, as a AI startup of the week. So Louisa AI is actually it started at Goldman Sachs by a managing director who was like connecting with someone just out of chance, just like on an off chance, he was visiting an office, happened to run into someone who was describing a problem and how it was an idea which was related to derivatives, transactional derivatives. It was complex but very lucrative. However, he had no takers. They got to talk, and then that led for them several months later to find a deal. And and this triggered a thought in him that okay, it was like a serendipity, right? I mean, he just came upon that idea, just happened to be at the right place at the right time, even though it was not in his office, met a person who felt thirsty at the same time around the water cooler, and then they had happened to discuss that, which eventually led to a deal, significant deal later. So that made him thinking that what if we can systematize the serendipity with the data, which means that what if you can connect people and the ideas without them actually making it based on purely on the luck. And what that means is, for example, if Jamie is having certain expertise and I have certain idea or an expertise, and we don't even know about each other having that idea or expertise, but because of our, let's say, our engagement within the CRM system, because of our emails within the organization, because of our and preferences that we have demonstrated, um, it can find and make that connection, and it can then send out a note to both of them. Hey, here is something happening in the industry and you seem to be connected, or maybe potentially interested in this because of your expertise. Want to talk? And that is how actually that idea originated. um, it is so essentially what they do is they create the profile. So let's say if an organization opts in to use that platform, they call it relationship intelligence platform. It uses the data from, let's say, CRM, the emails and other knowledge graphs, and and it then processes the signals like news and knowledge base articles, and they have their own proprietary database as well about the companies as well as about the individuals based on their preference and likeness. So it is like they're maintaining a private, their own LinkedIn kind of database. And then based on the enterprise data, they can then connect the dots. So for example, and this is a real example that was reported by actually the Business Insider, where I read this story. And the idea was that there was actually some semiconductor plant in Taiwan which was looking for funding. And they happened to find that in a company there was a person who actually had worked at that semiconductor plant and potentially knew the people in that company. And there was another person who was actually expert in the project financing of those kind of industry. What it did is it identified based on their all their data internally as well as externally, and then it connected them. Hey, why don't you talk about this? This is an example of semiconductor plant needing the funding. And eventually it led to a $10 billion project funding, and I think they've funded $6 billion out of that. So you can imagine, right? This was a deal completely not in the making, and it was made purely based on the data and AI. Great example, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And I go back to your quote, or the quote of the week from David Solomon, where he said, we're not in an AI bubble. And I think the important thing there that he mentioned was it's about identifying use cases and applying it to business. And the Louisa AI is a perfect example of that. It's creating new scenarios or opportunities and aligning data, couple that with AI to do new things. And I think that's the important part, whether or not it's Louisa AI or anybody else, but it's about how we collectively as an industry, as a group, are creating these types of applications that can leverage AI in either augmenting the type of work that we do, and or just coming up with new scenarios to use AI. So yeah, I think this is a great example of that.
Yeah, and they as I say, right. I mean, they use one of the concern that people may think, okay, it probably is using a lot of personal data. Is it really legit? So yes, I mean, of course, a company actually buys this, and then the company authorizes the individuals in their enterprise to opt in for that one, and the people can choose, like based on whatever their enterprise information is, that anyways available, but they can also choose to provide additional data, right? So you can actually enhance your own profile, add more tags, so you can actually narrate about yourself, and it will add more tags in your profile. So remember, it creates a private profile of yourself, much like LinkedIn, but it's private within that one. So they do take care of the privacy. But the thing is that this company is only for the finance industry. They call it like for finance by finance. So
Mm,
right now they're limited in that industry.
got it. No, it sounds good. Love to see where they go in the future, as well as maybe whatever else Goldman Sachs actually spins off and the type of work and the ventures that they're looking at. So great space for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a good segue, I guess. As we talk about new applications or new uses for AI, there always comes up, thoughts around, well, what are the risks associated with AI or how that's going to be used? So, this has been a space that's been somewhat fragmented before. There's been what I'll call frameworks that have been developed, but they usually only focus on a limited set of potential risks. And there's always gaps on what's identified. Maybe it's not even covered at all, or there's misinformation or quote unquote information pollution as it relates to what is being identified as a potential risk. So, this is something that folks or researchers at MIT actually took a step back and wanted to create something that was more comprehensive to collect and identify the potential risks that are associated with AI. So what they did is they actually created a database of over 700 different AI risks, things that can be categorized by different factors. An example there is intentionality in terms of use of output from AI. But then they also broke it down into different domains, things like discrimination or cyber attacks. So, this is something that I think is pretty powerful because there's many different potential uses for this type of data. And let me just bring my desktop up for a second. So this is this risk repository. So there's a couple different things. One, you could scroll through and understand what it actually is, but there's two pieces to this. One, there's a article which is their definition of why this is needed, how they came up with taxonomy. Again, 80 pager, 79. If you really want to take the time to read through everything there. But what's also very interesting is this is, like I said, it's a database. So you can explore this actual database and get down into the information. So this comes over as a spreadsheet, Google Sheets, that lists all these things out. So again, this is something I think that would be very powerful. Now, where this could be used, and I think this is, where potentially this may end up. Obviously, organizations can look at these various different risk categories, but I think this is going to be very important as it comes down to policies and the way that lawmakers or legislation may actually look at, well, what needs to be structured as far as, well, how can we limit these potential risks? So again, there's probably many different things that can come out of using this repository, but certainly that will be one where we think about what's the implication from a legal perspective, how this may show up in I'll call it any regulation that may come out, or hopefully to address some of these different risks. So that being said, MIT does have plans to expand or to provide additional research to this. So it's identifying any shortcomings in the initial responses from other organizations, additional education institutions. So we'll see where this goes. But I know that I know, Shadab, you have something that I know you wanted to talk about, which is the California bill, which I believe is heading to the state assembly. So there's, this is a perfect tie because that California legislation obviously looks to regulate artificial intelligence. So you want to give a couple words
Yeah.
about that?
Yes, in fact, and before I do, Jamie, this what you talked about, the AI risk repository. I think this is a great database, over 200 risks, because a lot of companies and the people who are responsible to evaluate AI today in the corporate world, they still are trying to figure out, right, what are those potential areas. I think this could become a good reference for them to see what are the potential risks, identify what is relevant for their organization, and then evaluate based on that. Because every company, like you talked about, the legals and the people who are responsible, bless you, are doing this. The only thing I fear is that there will be RFPs coming out with all this. Somebody will just copy paste
Yeah,
on this and ask vendors fill it all, and there
yeah,
will be a lot of information which will be too much information.
yeah. They'll be like, please, specify again
Exactly.
all the 700 risks, how you mitigate those. Yeah, that would not be fun. Definitely not for me.
Exactly, and to the other point that you mentioned about the regulation, I think we talked about it before. So it has been in the work before. There were some objections to it. It is called SB 1047. It's an AI legislation, and as usual, California has taken a lead on this. So state level, actually, the regulation. So it would be only applicable in the California. But given that most of the AI companies are actually based out of there and or will be operating there, of course, it will be applicable to all. Now, the thing is that they actually had put a legal requirement on the AI companies that basically develop these large language models, AI frontier models, and they spend more than $100 million on the training, which means it pretty much cover all the major providers and developers. Now, the thing was that it has actually a lot of good provision, like, okay, protect your whistleblowers and make sure that you have safety precaution. But it also had a clause which essentially provide a lot of penalty on the companies, open source companies who provide those open source model, and there has been a lot of controversy about it, right? Should the open source developers, like Meta is a great example, who will be actually in part of this purview. So if, let's say, somebody downloads Llama 3.1 and then misuse it for some reason, now in this case, as per this regulation, the Meta will be actually liable for that one. So there has been a lot of difference of perspective in terms of, should the developer be responsible, should the application developer be responsible for it, rather. So I think there has been a lot of criticism. A lot of politicians have criticized it, including Nancy Pelosi, and as well as but I think it has still been given, although Anthropic actually provided some improvement suggestion. I think there were two of them and they were accepted, so there has been some amendments to it. And let's see what comes out. I think I'm not too sure from my perspective, Jamie. Like, I understand that application providers are absolutely responsible, so they should be responsible for this liability. Should the LLM developer, like Meta, should they be responsible if somebody is using their open source LLM for some harmful purpose? I think to an extent they should be, because you can't just provide something. And I think you will give some example later in the episode why the original provider should have some sort of reliability, of course, related.
Yeah, I take a slightly different view on this. I'm a firm believer that there should not be so much government regulation that it basically quells innovation, development capabilities by organizations. My fear is that this bill from California would be too harsh or too stringent, and you might have companies that, number one, don't get created, two, don't really innovate on the pace that they could potentially, and or maybe just leave California, or maybe leave the United States altogether. So I mean, there's got to be this balance. Yes, there has to be these checks and balances, and you can't have something that quote unquote may do harm. But I think there could be more harm that's placed on companies if things are too restrictive.
I agree with you, Jamie. Like there is a funny meme there out there, right? Like US innovates and Europe regulates. It should not become like that scenario where regulation completely overtake the innovation piece right now. I agree with you that there has to be a balance. I don't know where that balance is, but there has to be a balance to this.
Yeah, definitely agree there. So, speaking of balance, and maybe the balance of world powers as it relates to LLMs. Uh, so, OpenAI actually recently released a new version of GPT-4o. Yes, by the way, I know that there's tons of rumors about the next version of GPT, especially as there's been so much like hinting at strawberry, which I know we talked a little bit about last episode, but while all that's going on, they just dropped a new version. So it's not like you're going to get like GPT-4, next or whatever it is. It seems like OpenAI has just started to put dates on the API releases. So while it may seem very small, like this new version is actually 2024 0808. Yes, that's literally the date it was released. But there's many different things that are actually packed into this new release. So first off is that this new model actually is outperforming not only GPT-4o, but a lot of the other models like Gemini 1.5 Pro EXP. So how is that actually being done? So I don't know if everyone knows this, but there's a site that you could go to. It's anonymous chatbot. Basically has all the different quote unquote large language models that you can test, but you don't know what model you're actually using. So it's basically a blind test. So not to impose your thoughts on, like I'm more gravitating towards Gemini model or a Claude model or an OpenAI model or any other model that's out there. So you're given with a prompt 2 different outputs, and it's humans that are picking, oh, I like this version better than the next. Well, when the GPT-4o latest model was released, there was over 11,000 community votes just over the last week, and OpenAI was picked to reclaim that spot because, again, Gemini 1.5 Pro was the current leader in this. So I call this like users picking what they believe is the best responses. So OpenAI reclaimed that. It actually scored 1,314 overall votes. So there's notable improvements within this model. So other than, just claiming that it's got the top spot, improvements in coding, follow instructions, quote unquote, the whole concepts around, train of thought logic that's just, embedded within this latest model, as well as then technical improvements in terms of hard prompts. To me, since I dabble a little bit on the development side, one of the biggest drawbacks that me personally have seen for the latest models, coming from OpenAI, is you're very limited in the output tokens from whatever has been the GPT-4o models. You're limited to 4,096 tokens, but this latest release increases that output token 4x. So you now can go to 16,384. While not the largest, because hopefully some folks know that the GPT-4 model, not the Turbo, but the GPT-4 32K actually has a 32,000 token output window. But again, that's a less capable model than what we have now. So to me, other than the fact that it's better encoding, the instructions, the chain of thought, but having a 4x token window is music to my ears, to say the least. So, like I said, this is a new model that's been out there. So this is at the API level. I have not seen it introduced yet. If you're using ChatGPT, yes, I'm a paid user of that service. So it's not there yet. At least I haven't seen it. But again, it's at the API level. If you're using Azure, OpenAI, it is released in a chat playground beta testing. So you could, kick the tires, if you will, on this latest OpenAI model within the Azure realm as well.
Wow, it is this as per the benchmark, it is significant, right? Ahead of the next one, which is Gemini 1.5 Pro, and it's surprising the Sonnet, right? The Claude 3.5 Sonnet has fallen significantly off the chart, right? They're now somewhere in the fourth position, which I thought that they were actually, I think, leading the chart just a couple of months ago.
Yeah,
Um,
there's pretty much a tie for fourth place between
hmm,
GPT-4o Mini. Again, Mini. Again, there's latest API versions of it, but the Mini has got the 2024-07-18 version. But yeah, it's actually beating out Sonnet just by a little bit, just even in that Mini model. So
yeah,
um, yeah, I look at it this way: all of these model players play leapfrog with each other. They're all pretty close to each other in terms of MMLU, which we'll talk a little bit later on because there's been some new releases of some models. But yeah, I go back to like, what do people actually feel? If you could put feeling as a definition around using these models, and it's that human interaction. And again, I go back to this latest GPT-4o model really has caught the attention again of people on that feel and what it's giving back as output.
yeah. It actually, I love this benchmark, Jamie, because this is equivalent of a blind taste test,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Say that 10 times, right? Blind taste test. So it was a fascinating one, right? Remember that Pepsi challenge.
Yeah,
Pepsi was always getting beaten by the Coca-Cola, and I think there was some sort of a bias towards Coca-Cola. So what they did is there was a blind taste test somewhere in 1975, and they let people just taste without knowing which one they are testing, and then opting for which one they liked more. And eventually, they proved that people actually like Pepsi more, right? So that was really a good, indisputable kind of a test, and that's what I feel, that this is like a blind taste test, right? Nobody's Some people just love Google stable, some love Claude, or things like that, but this is like nobody knows what they're testing, and then they're just voting for the result, and then it is just ranking them. So it's pretty reliable, I would say, in that, from a user experience point of view.
yeah, yep, yeah, exactly. I think you hit it right. Hit the nail on the head. With the blind taste test. Um, similarity. It's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Okay. So those were the news of the week, and there were some launches too. Of course. And let's start with Google. We talked about the Gemini, and Google had an event made by Google, which is their event primarily focused around the hardware, things that they actually make, right, from a hardware point of view. So of course the Pixel and the mobile generally figure most, other than the other devices, of course, as well. So one of the highlight was that they launched actually something called Pixel Buds Pro 2, which is like earbuds. And then it also has an AI assistant, which is basically Gemini AI Live. So very similar to what they demoed earlier. It doesn't have, of course, video right now, but with the voice, you can actually interact. So if you wearing those buds, you can actually talk to it, even though when the phone is just in your pocket. So just like that, remember that movie Her, and where you can just have the phone around with you and then just talk to it while wearing that, right? So you're um, and Gemini AI, this Gemini Live, actually it can do a lot of things, and they gave those demo. Now this time, this in this event, something was different. Generally, Google does a lot of canned videos demos, so they are not live. They were always prepared videos, and they were criticized for that, because unlike, let's say, OpenAI, who very boldly does these kind of live
Yeah,
tests, they were criticized for it.
yeah. I remember whatever it was, like when they were announcing Gemini. A lot of the stuff was, I don't want to say smoke and mirrors, but it was a lot of videos, and then people couldn't get their hands on it. So there was a lot of backlash to that. So
Exactly. Exactly.
little different here.
And the thing is that so this time they went bold and they did a lot of live demos, Jamie. But Google, I think, is running through this. They're just carrying this curse, right? Something has to go wrong. So unfortunately, there was something wrong. There was a particular demo where actually they could take the picture and this using the Gemini AI live, you could actually take, and it's embedded on the in the mobile, right? So the good thing is that it's not like a separate app. I think it's embedded within the camera itself. You can actually take a picture, and the demo was around that, okay, look at this schedule of Sabrina Carpenter, and then tell me, does it fit with my own schedule and the calendar too, so that I can attend that concert. And it took 3 attempts to actually get that right. It was just not delivering the results. So that's always a downside, but still people have appreciated their
To me,
willingness to
that's
come up.
more real. When you do demos and things
Exactly.
don't exactly work out right, you're like, all
Exactly.
right, yeah. So I you know me, I've done tons of demos and sometimes they don't work out as planned, but that aids to the credibility, I think, in some cases. So I
More
applaud
authentic.
them for doing that. One thing that struck me on this is they beat OpenAI to the punch.
Yep.
Because OpenAI in their spring update, which seems like it was eons ago, but they had the new voice, and we talked about the Scarlett Johansson implications and the legal ramifications there. But anyway, OpenAI had announced that, and it looked like they were going to be the ones that were going to be first to the market. So it certainly appears that Google leapfrogged OpenAI, at least in this one case, or at least in this scenario, about bringing this, Gemini Live to users. The one thing I didn't catch, is this available for everybody with a, on a Google platform or with the Pixel phones, or is this only like in a test environment right now?
It is available if you are part of the Google One AI premium subscription.
Okay.
So if you have that package, then you actually get the access to the Gemini Live and bunch of other AI features as well. And I think they have like trial version, like 1 month free, and then after that, it's about $20 a month. So, but worth a try. I'm gonna try that. Although I don't have an Android device, so I have to figure it out how to try that. But yeah, as you said, right, they have taken a little bit of a advantage here, time to market, and because both the Google and OpenAI, they did this demo almost about same day. In fact, a day before OpenAI had done that. But time to market, Google take the lead.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm an iPhone user, so if you forget how to use it on an iPhone, let me know.
Yeah. The other thing is, Jamie, they had a few other announcements as well, like so some like using AI within. So they're trying to infuse AI within multiple apps and features like editing photos and things like that. So actually, you can do that. One of the things that I've really liked is that the Add Me feature. So the Add Me feature is really good when you take the picture and you can't take the selfie. Somebody has to take it from the group, but then they also want to be added. So it's pretty good. In many of these scenarios, it may be pretty useful. Although concerns rise that, okay, is it like creating the fakes? Because it's not real. But I don't think it's a fake, because you're just taking it to two different frames and then you are merging them. It's not as fake, because the person happens to be there anyway. So yeah, those are some of the key things from the made by Google, Jamie.
Sounds good. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about some additional releases that were announced. So XAI, everyone probably knows that there's Grok, Grok 1.5, but they released two new models, to be honest. One being Grok 2 and the other one being Grok 2 Mini. So these are both in beta. They come with a bunch of new capabilities or improved capabilities, like improved reasoning, but they also come with the ability to generate images. So What's interesting here is, a lot of the focus is not being put on the new capabilities and the benchmarks. And let me just bring back my screen. I'll show you a couple of things. So I'm on the XAI site. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that they'll read into. One of the things that I took out from this is when you look at the benchmarks, the MMLU, they went from 81.3 with Grok 1.5 using the larger model, or even the Grok 2 Mini. It jumped up to 86.2 or 87.5. And when you look at, a model like Grok 2 compared to something like GPT-4o, that's at an 88.7. Yeah, okay, it doesn't beat it, but it comes pretty darn close. So when you look at, some of the other models like Gemini Pro, it actually beats Gemini Pro 1.5, or it beats things like Claude 3 Opus, and it comes again pretty close to the Llama 3 405B model. So I say this in the sense that it's made a lot of strides in what the model is capable of. Now, as I kind of alluded to, that's not what it's making noteworthy news for. So one of the things that X wanted to do is make this model something that could be integrated and useful inside of X. So what a lot of people do when they're creating sorry, I'm still going to call it tweets, but what do they do when they want to create a new post or a new tweet inside of X? They're going to want to create images or create memes that are associated with that. So what Grok 2 Mini and Grok 2 bring in is the ability to generate images. They do that actually by using a third-party image generation model. It's from Black Forest Labs. It's based upon Flux 1.0. If someone wants to read up on that, we'll have show notes and you could go take a look at what the Flux model is. But that's the image generation component of it. Now, what's different about this Grok image generation capability is there's not as much guardrails around what can be generated. So if you try to go into something like Midjourney or DALL-E 3, there's a lot of guardrails that will prohibit obviously things like nudity and or sexual connotations and or political misuse of image generation. Well, that doesn't exist. Let's say at least it doesn't appear like it exists on the top when you're using Grok. And as I kind of alluded to, that's unfortunately why Grok has been making a lot of news, not necessarily on these MMLU and the benchmarks, but it's on that image generation. Let me give you an example of it. I'm going to hopefully not offend people with what I'm about to do. I'm not going to go crazy on it. But by the way, I probably should have mentioned this. You need to be signed up for a subscription inside of X to be able to use Grok, or at least these beta versions of Grok. So this is only where you're going to see Grok 2 Mini or Grok 2. So here it is. It's similar to what anything else. I mean, you just put in your prompts and tell it what you want to do. So I've gone ahead and told it to generate a image. And if you see my prompt, create a photorealistic image of Mickey Mouse entering into a gun shop in the middle of New York City. So a couple things here, obviously. Other systems don't allow you to use, I'll say copyrighted material, aka Mickey Mouse, let alone Mickey Mouse going into a gun shop. So, you could say, oh my God, is this questionable content? This goes back on to, I'm trying to say this in the right way, the free speech concepts of what X is trying to promote. So whether or not you're on that side or not, it's just understanding where it's coming from. So the intent here is to have more freedom in the things that you're looking to do. Now, I will tell you this, it's not going to this image generation is not going to, create full on nudity and things like that. So there are some limitations, but it's a heck of a lot less than those other platforms. So if you want, grab a subscription if you don't have it already, and try it out on your own if you want to.
Yeah, and Jamie, to your point, you know, not trying to offend someone, but I'll tell you, you will always be offending someone because, the only way to actually avoid offending or avoiding the criticism is like as Aristotle said, right? Do nothing, say nothing, be nothing. That's the only way to avoid criticism. Otherwise, you will always have somebody always criticizing. So
Yep.
no worries there. So, I think one of the things that I wanted to on this topic that you mentioned about, the of course the potential of misusing this, right? A lot of people, to be honest, the world is pretty large place, and the human cognitive abilities are pretty diverse. So I would say that there are, like a lot of people, all they know about is if they see something, they will just immediately believe it, without having to verify whether it's true, whether it looks fake, or anything like that, right? I mean, so in fact, it's already happening, right? So if you can see, this is election year in US and so many other countries, and everybody's worried about use of AI, right? Deep fakes, etc. In fact, that discussion has already started. The leading candidates, presidential candidates, have already started talking about the deep fakes. So, I think the big data was used tremendously in the previous election, and I think this year onwards, every election, anywhere in the world, AI is going to actually lead the race. So I think it will become a major political tool. I hope that people use the common sense and they don't fall in trap for any deep fakes or anything like that. So, okay, the other
Concern.
thing.
Yeah. Uh, Sorry. Yeah. Um, I'll just leave it at that. Certainly concerned, and people need to be aware of that, and hopefully, don't get caught up in things around deep fakes. But anyway,
Exactly.
sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, no. So I think the other story, actually, other launch that happened, Jamie, wanted to quickly talk about this prompt caching with Claude, right?
Yeah.
So Claude, actually, Anthropic, they actually came up with something called the prompt caching. Caching, actually, it basically lets you store part of the prompts which potentially is going to be used repeatedly, right? So that way what happens is that when you're interacting, and this is for the API calls, for example, right? So for API calls, when you are making the call, and if the part of that prompt is going to be used, and if you use this feature called prompt caching, that will actually allow you to reuse part of the previous prompt, which means that your response will become much faster. As you're showing on the screen right now, this benchmark, your response can be much faster. And even though you are paying 25% more for the first prompt because of prompt caching, but then your total cost goes down because of prompt caching use, right? So if you have a use case which has that kind of scenario where you will potentially be using the prompt again and again, like it's part of the conversations or things like that, then this feature will be very handy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I could think of a couple different use cases off the top of my head, and it's all about driving that cost down. Great example is, let's say you're using these large language models to analyze over code that you've already written. Let's say you've got thousands of lines of code. Well, yeah, you take the hit once for a slightly more costly read of that code, but if you're constantly going back and needing to get to that code, it's going to be a heck of a lot less costly, as you said. And as you see here, it's only 10% the cost of those base tokens. Again, if you're using an example like Claude 3.5 Sonnet, $3 per million tokens, yeah, it's a little bit more costly on that first cache write of whatever's in your prompt, but 30 cents for a million tokens on those cache reads, tremendous value. Like I said, reading code. One example, let's say if you're in a business and you've got a bunch of your documents and you're doing that in context learning, putting it as part of your prompt, and you're reading through that or need to get to that, this is going to be my opinion, a game changer in terms of cost, especially against a model as capable as the Claude 3 or 3.5 Sonnet model.
Yeah, and particularly this is just want to also highlight the key difference, right, between prompt caching and the RAG, right? So, for example, prompt caching is where you are having a localized interactions, right? I mean, this is not an external knowledge or some a knowledge which you don't have the access to, but it is part of that interaction. So it could be conversations, it could be the code that you're writing and trying to make an API call to, let's say, Anthropic models, and you want to do this prompt caching, right? Or it could be a book, or it could be a local file that you're trying to do. That's where the prompt caching helpful, right? Because it's part of the prompts, and you're making an API call and you're saving that. But let's say it doesn't do away with the need of the RAG. Remember, RAG is for external knowledge, right? The knowledge which is secure, which you don't have a direct access to, but through the agent or the chatbot, you can get the access to it because the agent or the chatbot has the access to that RAG alone. So many times people confuse between, okay, so if I put everything in prompt, like there has been some myth going on about, okay, oh, the Gemini actually supports 1 million or 2 million tokens, so I don't need RAG anymore, RAG is dead. No, that's not true. RAG has very different use cases, and the prompts have actually different use cases. Sometimes they overlap, you have both the options, but not all the time.
Yeah, no, definitely true. It's RAG is not dead based upon prompt caching.
Exactly. And not to forget about the OpenAI, they also actually did a minor release. They just had some small news about. So what happens is that they have the safety system, which essentially deals with the current models. Like the how to essentially prevent the misuse of the current frontier models. And then they have system called super alignment, which is essentially targeted towards the future, AGI and super intelligence kind of thing, right? So how to govern and not let it fall into the hands, the early development of whatever is happening on the AGI super intelligence. So that's called super alignment. um, in between, they have something called preparedness framework, which is essentially, um, again, potentially to prevent the misuse or development of the capabilities which could be potentially misused, right? So it is like somewhere in the middle of the current and the future. And as part of that, they also evaluate constantly how good the LLMs or the frontier models are at the software engineering task, like, autonomously coding and creating the code autonomously and learning, right? So it's part of that risk assessment, how good they are. And in fact, there is a benchmark called SWE benchmark, software engineering benchmark, which is constantly evaluating these models and their ability to create, like the agents basically creating some coding pieces, etc., to solve a real world problem, right? A coding problem. So it uses that, it it essentially benchmarks the model's performance. And it's not easy. Okay, you may think that, okay, all right, so I mean, all these models do the coding, but it's not true. So the software engineering benchmark uses generally the reference from the GitHub codes, and then it compares what the models are able to do against what has already been done and documented in GitHub, and then compare the output and all those kind of things. So it is still, I think, between 20 and 40% kind of at that level. So what OpenAI has done is essentially they believe that this is an important dimension of that preparedness framework to evaluate models and know that, okay, they are not exceeding the safe limits. So they've actually worked with them, and they are releasing some new improvements and metrics and things like that. And in fact, working with the software engineering benchmark to enhance that benchmark and make sure that it is considered in that benchmark. So because sometimes the current benchmark, as per them, sometimes underestimates the abilities of the models. So that's why they wanted to actually ban. So it's a minor news, but just wanted to mention about that as well.
Okay. No, that sounds good. Staying on the topic of OpenAI, but as it relates to Microsoft's Azure OpenAI, There was a recent announcement and you know things that were put out there as far as usability improvements and new commercial models for using the OpenAI models on Azure. So if people have been using this before, you know that there's quota that's associated with using a model, but now there is a model independent quota, which is something that would be beneficial because you don't have a single quota that limits the models and versions. So this is actually going to help reduce quota administration, as well as them being able to look at acceleration of different experimentation with new models that come out. So that's certainly useful in and of itself. But I will tell you, having as we mentioned before, we work for Microsoft. If companies wanted to get quota increases, I don't want to say it was difficult, but it was where you had to get a hold of your Microsoft account team, get things approved, and go through those various different requests. Well, now there's a self-service quota request system. So this is where you as a user can actually request these quota increases. And by the way, when I say quota, it's quota on tokens against the model. So you no longer will have to engage with a Microsoft sales team to get quota increases. And many of these self-service quota requests can actually be auto-approved based upon your model and the region where you're looking to get that model deployed. There's also capability around default provisioned managed quota in many regions. So, and for folks that don't know, there's more or less like this pay-as-you-go model for use of the OpenAI models on Azure, but then there's also what's called provision throughput units, and provision manage is a way of actually getting more increased or decreased latency against the models that you're using. So it's sort of like ring wrapped around your own model rather than it being shared. But what this comes back to is without having to actually go and request quota for those provision managed or provision throughput units. Outside of that, there's new hourly reservation model. So for that same thing that I just talked about around a provision throughput, you had to focus on just doing like a monthly charge. Well, now there's an hourly uncommitted usage, which means that, hey, if I wanted to use this provision managed throughput environment for a given region for these models, I can now do that on an hourly basis. And then there's also additional term discounts for using things like Azure reservations, which you may be familiar with, whether or not it's on Azure or anywhere else, where reserving for a specific type of service. Now that comes also to the Azure OpenAI platform. So again, things that really just help with, I'll say, usability and the way that you use and deploy models, but then also new capabilities around hourly and reservations, kind of focused around that commercial model. So hopefully this will be well received by customers that are using these capabilities within the Azure platform.
Yeah, and this is actually major story from the Azure point of view, Jamie. And you just put me out of the job by saying that you don't need to work with sales team anymore. No, actually, just kidding. But yes, it was actually a cumbersome process because it was a manual process to get the provision throughput. You have to work with the team, and then there will be manual provisioning, and it took some time and did not have the transparency. So Microsoft has been working on this aspect for quite some time, and they actually have come out with several new enhancements on this service. So as part of this, you can actually the customers can do the self service, as you said. The other important thing is that you talked about the hourly PTU, etc. And you know from an enterprise customer point of view, if you are planning to deploy an application in the production, generally provision throughput is actually meant for that. So provision throughput is generally meant for the production application. Pego is meant for actually the prototypes and the pilots and the POCs kind of services. Many times companies don't plan ahead and then they go in the production with Pego, because Pego is there is no guarantees of any throughput, etc. Provision throughput is not a dedicated, but it's provision. So you get much better throughput consistency. So if you want a latency consistency and if you are latency sensitive, provision throughput is the way to go. And many times the companies, so what was happening was earlier that companies had the choice of either going to pay go or then they go to PTU, provision throughput. But provision throughput is a big commitment. The minimum was about $31,200 a month for anything other than, I think there was GPT 3.5 Turbo, which was only for half of it. So it was a big commitment for the company. So with this hourly provision throughput, now the companies can try. But hourly provision throughput is not meant for production. It is only to try provision throughput, and then if it works for you, then go for the monthly. For production, you still should go for the monthly commitment or the yearly commitment. That's where you get much efficient service. Like remember, it's like almost 80-90% cheaper than the hourly. So just want to clarify because it's a new thing that has come out and many companies are still not very clear which one to use where.
Yeah.
The other important flexibility that they've also brought out is that kind of a decoupling of the model from the provision throughput. So I think that is also helping because earlier, you had to go with certain model and the provision throughput, but now you can actually kind of decouple. You can buy that and you can switch the models as well.
Yeah,
Uh,
and that's super important, especially as like new models come out and you want to use that quote unquote throughput that you have, but you don't want to buy a whole new provision throughput. You could just segregate that across different models. So that's definitely a great new benefit.
Correct. So yeah, and we will continue to talk about it. I think a little bit more on the Azure related updates as well. Um, the I have actually one more item that I want to talk about. Okay, which again on the line of the business value of the AI, what we are seeing. And the Walmart CEO actually talked about AI in the latest earning. And if in fact, if you look at it, most of the earning report from the companies they have some or other mention of the AI in that. In fact, they're bound to do that if the companies don't mention AI a few times in their earnings statements. That doesn't go very well. It reflects in the stock price. So Walmart actually talked about it, and he talked about that they have used multiple LLMs to accurately create or improve over 850 million pieces of data in the catalog. And without the Gen AI, he mentioned that report that this work would have required nearly 100 times the current headcount to complete in the same amount of time. So this is a very real and live example of how AI is actually making a difference. And it is very similar to what we have talked about earlier in one of the episodes, the case study of CarMax using the AI. They use actually the LLMs to create the description of some of the cars and creating the summary of the reviews. And they also had the similar sentiment on public that if we did not use this, it would have taken us years to do what we were able to achieve in weeks and months. And this is what Walmart is also talking about. Let's listen to Doug McMillan, CEO of Walmart, talking about how they're leveraging Gen AI and what benefit they're realizing when he talked about it in the earning call last week. Let's have a listen.
We're finding tangible ways to leverage generative AI to improve the customer, member, and associate experience. We're leveraging data and large language models from others and building our own. One example is that we've used generative AI to improve our product catalog. The quality of the data in our catalog affects nearly everything we do, from helping customers find and buy what they're looking for, to how we store inventory in the network, to delivering orders. We've used multiple large language models to accurately create or improve over 850 million pieces of data in the catalog. Without the use of generative AI, this work would have required nearly 100 times the current headcount to complete in the same amount of time. And for associates picking online orders, showing them high-quality images of product packaging helps them quickly find what they're looking for. Customers and members are already enjoying AI-powered search on our app and site. And now they'll have even more help with a new shopping assistant that provides advice and ideas, answering questions like, which TV is best for watching sports? Looking ahead, the assistant will be able to respond with more specific follow-up questions like, how's the lighting in the room where you'll place the TV? Helping our sellers on our marketplace is also an area where we see opportunities to be better using generative AI. As we work to do all we can to help our sellers grow their businesses, we're testing a new experience to select US-based sellers that allows them to ask us anything. We want our sellers focused on selling, so the more we can make it a seamless experience, the better. The new assistant will quickly summarize and provide the seller with succinct answers without them having to sort through long articles or other materials. The use cases for this technology are wide-ranging and affect nearly all parts of our business. And we'll continue to experiment and deploy AI and generative AI applications globally. We're anchored in the responsible use of AI, while also moving with speed and in an EDLC way to meet our future needs and scale these experiences. Today's Walmart is different. We are people-led and tech-powered. We've put ourselves in a position where we can continue to grow because we're serving people however they want to be served. We can grow profit faster than sales while investing in our associates and lowering prices for customers and members. And we can grow ROI as we make the right capital investments and grow profitability.
That was a really good summary of how Walmart is benefiting from the Gen AI in their products, in their service, and in their interfaces.
No, that's great. I mean, especially when you could get into the details around how this is helping a company, the use cases that you just talked through. I think that's really where we start to see the impact of what AI is doing. It's not just, sorry for the folks that are just doing this, but it's not just a chatbot. This is really aligned with, real things that organizations are, wrestling with, and how can they improve, whether it's efficiency or things that, in this case, like improving the product catalog at Walmart. So great, great, scenario on use case.
It's a great endorsement for the AI. And one last thing, a quick trivia fun fact, Jamie, with of course all these AI hype, I don't call it hype, I'm just saying that AI wave, let's say, um, you know, a lot of companies like Walmart are benefiting, consumers are benefiting, but of course there are enterprises who are benefiting. But Nvidia, for example, is not the only one who's benefiting, or the Microsoft or the Google or the Walmart. Actually, everybody is. So in fact, in a great example, a small country is actually benefiting from AI a lot, and that country is Anguilla. And Anguilla is actually because they have like all the countries who have like their two-letter code assigned as a country code, like .us or .in for India. Likewise, Anguilla has .ai as their country code for the web domains. So you can have like whatever, like you want to have like Twitter dot AI, which essentially would mean that to get that domain, you have to actually pay a fee for that domain, and that revenue, part of that revenue, will go to that country because that country Anguilla now owns that .ai. So, in a funny fact, almost 300,000, right? 287,000, something like that. That AI registrations were in the past year alone. And that has given, roughly about like $30 million just in domain registration fee, which is actually about 10% of that country's GDP. Jamie, imagine 10% of your GDP comes out
Just
from
domain
the
registrations.
AI.
That's incredible. I mean, that talk about, I want to say talk about luck, but that's a great way of leveraging your country name. Now I'm thinking about that. I'm like, what can I create as far as a domain with .ai?
Uh, yep, absolutely. I think something, if you can predict the future, Jamie, that would be great, actually. In fact, people have made some money, actually, by predicting the potential, use of the domain name. There is a whole industry around it. I would say that there are people who actually anticipate, okay, these two companies are probably going to merge, and they are merging, and there is some talk, and then they will actually create a domain name with that merge name, something like that. Okay, but it's a bet, who has, sometime it pays, sometime it doesn't, of course. um, and yeah, that's what it is, Jamie. For
So
this week, I think that is all we have.
yeah, like I said, there was a packed amount of information and a lot in there. So glad everybody stuck with us, listening. I think we just surpassed the hour, something like that. So thanks for listening, watching, and see you next time.
Everybody have a great time, and we'll talk again. Sorry, we are not able to keep it, and I think I'm giving up on trying to keep it up within the third, because it just so much is happening, Jamie. And in order to really give that whole value to our listeners and the audience, I think we need to cover in enough depth and detail and the width, so that people can really consider it as a single stop for their weekly update to the AI.
Yep,
Okay,
agree.
great. Jimmy, talk soon next week, and bye, everyone.
Likewise. Catch you later.
Bye. And he's talking about multiple use cases where the LLMs are very, very useful, like improvement of product catalog, order picking, like the AI assisting associates in picking online orders by showing high quality product packaging images to help them quickly find what they're looking for, right? So it's a good use of, like vision capabilities of the models. Then there is the AI powered search, right? The customer members benefit from that AI powered search. There's a shopping assistants, which basically you can like customer can ask questions like which TV is best for watching sports. So essentially, it provides that narrative and full description of why and what you should actually go for. So they have that also available. They have a follow-up questions. That was another use case in which the AI is useful. There is a supporting sellers on the marketplace. So essentially Walmart is leading the way, and Walmart is, by the way, a big Azure customer. So they have talked about it. I think last year they were on the stage with Satya as well. So they are using it, and it's available in the earning report. And I picked up this story actually. There is a person, Arman Ruiz, VP of Product AI at IBM, and he actually posted that on the LinkedIn. So just want to give the credit to him, and that brought my attention to it. But really good story. This is a real example and a reminder to the naysayers who say that AI is not delivering any value.